All right, we're recording now. Okay. So again, I'm going to upload that PowerPoint soon this afternoon for you. Okay, so we're talking about the founding of Virginia. So there's a couple of things that we need to talk about. We talked about the Tudors and Henry VIII's various problems with getting an heir, but what we so Elizabeth, right, who's an amazing queen, who is Henry VIII's last heir. As we said, she doesn't marry. She names herself the Virgin Queen. She obviously doesn't want to give up any power, so good on her. And she refuses to keep entertaining suitors, right? Because the only people she can legally really marry are other royalty, and she has no interest in doing that. Apparently, there aren't very many available. So she dies in 1601, I believe. So they name Virginia after the Virgin Queen, but then what happens? Well, she has no children. So they trace the family lineage back, and it goes to her cousin James. And her cousin James and her share grandparents. Okay, that's how they trace it back. James is a descendant of Henry VIII's sister, okay, in Scotland. So James is already king of Scotland in his own right. He's King James VI. But when he becomes King James of England, he becomes James I, and his mother is Mary, Queen of Scots. So lots of drama there. If we had more time, it would be another soap opera for you. Mary, Queen of Scots is killed by Elizabeth. Elizabeth beheads her, but then makes her son king after her, names her son as her heir. So, lots of intrigue there. But for our purposes, right, he becomes King James I, which is where Jamestown gets his name. Okay? Now, when they land in 1607, again, they are created by a joint stock company, which we had previously talked about, being the first kind of form of corporations, right, where you have multiple investors that come together on this sort of business venture. Now, it's important we understand that Jamestown is founded for economics. It's all about business. They are there to find gold. And when, of course, they don't find gold, they look to other resources. But they only send a certain kind of person, and they figure out very quickly that sending all men doesn't work. Sending all men that are either the noble class or upper middle class also doesn't work because nobody knows how to do anything, right? So then you start to see more and more people migrate over. And the Virginia Company is desperately trying to get more people to come to Jamestown, but they are also limiting what information gets out about how things are going there. So that's why, when we were talking about the Freethorn letter, he's writing back to his parents like, it's terrible here. I know that you sent me here thinking this would be a good idea, but it's not. So you have like 8,000 migrate in those years that are listed there. Only 1,300 survive to 1624. Okay, huge rate of death rate, mortality. So things are not going well. What happens? Why is it so terrible? Again, they don't spend a lot of time doing the things they need to survive. They're trying to find a way to make money, and this is kind of what hurts them. You also have, they don't have enough food. So when you are starving or when you are not getting enough nutrition, you start to get things like scurvy, which is basically not enough fresh fruit and vegetables. And that makes you more susceptible to disease, right? And you tend to have low immunity. In addition, they are not very warm. They didn't accordingly. They're having a hard time building shelters, etc. So this leads to that, but also the idea that they're not spending enough time working on basic necessities, food, shelter, etc. And so this is where you get the Powhatans. And the Powhatans become famous, of course, because of Pocahontas. But the Powhatans are the local Native American tribe. They do come out and make peace with the colonizers in Jamestown in an attempt to barter and trade with them for technology, for weapons. And again, Native Americans have their own civilizations. The Europeans don't just walk into and find, nobody there, or people who don't know how to build things, etc. They walk into fully functional civilizations, and many of which are at war with each other. So the Powhatans are looking at this new technology to give them an edge up, say the Iroquois or the Algonquins, that they may be at war at, and in response, they will give them food and teach them. They teach them how to farm in the Virginia soil. And little do they know, it's tobacco that's really going to save the colony anyway, right? They're not going to find any other riches. They're going to have to grow them. They're going to have to work for them. So, and right in the beginning, they have a peaceful relationship with the Powhatans. That does change, right? That changes rapidly later. And tobacco cultivation. You have John Smith and John Rolfe coming in. Let me just see if I want to make sure we're not missing any. Uh, sorry, any chats here? Any questions? No, I don't think so. Is the document we were supposed to read been posted yet? Yes. Please watch the video on YouTube. Okay. So tobacco saves Virginia. Excuse me. They bring in tobacco, they begin growing it, and this starts to produce money, and they're exporting it to Europe. Originally, James is like, this stinks when you smoke it, right? The Native Americans had been smoking it, and they shift Virginia to an agrarian settlement, means farming. Right? But tobacco needs lots of land and labor to be successful, right? And you have to grow it and then dry it and then pack it and ship it. So this new cultivation of tobacco that comes with John Smith and John Rolfe is very, again, not only saves the community, but also makes it a profitable business venture. Some other things that they institute, they start running it similar to kind of a military camp, although it's not, right? It's made up of individuals who are there on their own account. But they say things like, look, if you're not going to work, you don't get to eat. And we're all in this together. If you don't help everyone else out, if we don't function as a community of some sort, you're going to starve. We're all going to starve. So we need to come together and work together. So he institutes that. He also says, look, this is not a get-rich-quick scheme. You're not going to get rich quick here. If that's what you're after, go home, right? But you're going to have to work for it. And so you start to see a shift in there. So they're going to start farming tobacco. And by farming tobacco, again, they actually begin to turn a profit. The problem with colonies is that they are not initially profitable. This is a long-term investment. They don't start to make a profit or even break even, if you will, until the 1620s. And by that time, the Virginia Company is bankrupt. They've spent so much money and they can't get that back until the 1630s, 1640s that they go bankrupt. The London Company tries to save them, and that doesn't work either. Okay, so again, Virginia is very much about a agrarian business venture. That's what they're there for. They're not there for religion. Okay, now, good luck saying that name. Hopocanos Rebellion. This is Pocahontas's brother. Okay, so thanks to Disney, right? People know a lot about Pocahontas. They got some of that stuff right. No, I don't think they were talking trees or raccoons, but and not everybody looked that pretty. But she did save him. He was captured by the natives. They had some issues with encroachment, meaning moving in on Native American land. Pocahontas said, "Don't kill him." She did save his life, and later on, she did marry him. Okay, but her father is the elder here that's leading things, and he's the one that says, "Hey, let's make peace with them, and we can trade back and forth." But the brother, Pocahontas' oldest brother, who's going to take over for Dad, is finding that the white men or the Englishmen, the Jamestown people, are not following through on their end of the bargain, and they keep moving further and further out. The Englishmen need more and more land for tobacco, and so there is a rebellion in 1622. and they attack Jamestown and burn the place to the ground. Okay. In retaliation from that, the crown sends redcoats over to defeat, and eventually they subordinate the Powhatan Confederacy. So by 1646, the natives can't really pose any more of a threat to Jamestown, at least. So this kind of goes back to, what we're going on. Give me a minute here. I'm going to go back to there we go. All right. So by the 1620s, Jamestown is kind of made up of this. Let me pull all these in here. Sorry. All right. So in the middle in the center, you have the wealthy, right? Or you have the people who came first, the early colonizers, the early migrants, right? But you also have the businesses, where all the business is done. Then, right, as you move out, you have like the middle class, or the people who came later. But again, this is a taco agrarian community. So people are all spread out. So this is a really, right, this is a very condensed version of what's really happening. They're all over the place. They don't live tight knit. They don't live close to each other because they have huge farms, okay, or large farms. So then you have, right, the middle class and the artisans are going to live here. And as indentured servants begin to live out their indenture, they're given land on the outer of the circle, right? So they keep moving out, further and further out, and encroaching on Native Americans, which are all the way out here. Okay, and so as the English move this way, the Native Americans are starting to push back and say, whoa, 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 this is not what we talked about. And this really aggravates Pocahontas' brother. And he's the chief at the time. Dad's dead. Pocahontas is off in Europe with her hubby, and the Indians have had enough, right? Native Americans have had enough. So they attack Jamestown in 1622, burn the place down, the proverbial screw you, go home, and that unfortunately is not what happens. But the natives have had enough, so they do try to retaliate. And so this kind of leaves a couple of issues for Jamestown. Jamestown, again, as we said, has been kind of wallowing, has been not doing well. And the Virginia Company offers something called the headright system, and they even create self-government with the House of Burgesses in an attempt to get more people to migrate. So the more people that come over, the more likelihood the Virginia Company can prop itself up, that they're going to make more money. Okay, so the headright system, which starts in 1617, says that every migrant that comes over gets more acres for every person he brings. So let's say John comes over and he brings his wife and he brings his 4 kids. Okay, so he gets 20 more acres for every person that he brings. Okay, so it's trying to encourage these people to bring their families, not just single men, right? And if you bring families, then you have a vested interest. If you come just by yourself and you don't make it, you go back home and you do something else. But if you're in Virginia with your family and you are looking at not going to make it, your whole family is going to starve. So it makes you more invested on success of the colony if you bring your whole family. In addition, under the headright system, if you bring indentured servants, then you also get another 20 acres. In that, ideally you're going to give that to them at the end of the 7 years. So the headright system is put in place by the company, sorry, excuse me, in an attempt to get more people to bring entire families over and create communities. And the House of Burgesses is, again, self-government. They said, look, we're going to set up this form of like Congress. Okay, it's very small scale. And you all can elect burgesses, and then they will come together, have meetings, and decide what's going to happen locally, right? Now, the final say on laws and things of that nature is always going to be the crown, and you have to obey English laws, but pretty much leaves them to their own devices as long as they're paying their taxes and following English law. So this is new. Nobody has this kind of power back home. In England, the only way you get into Parliament at the time is you're born into it. In other words, you have a title, which is where you get the House of Lords. In the Parliament in England has two houses, similar to ours. They have the House of Lords and the House of Commons. The House of Lords is not elected, it's inherited. This is where you're going to see, you know, lords, viscounts, dukes, earls, etc. All of them are members of Parliament or MPs in the House of Lords. Then you have the House of Commons. And the House of Commons is technically elected, right? But very few people actually have the right to vote in England. You have to have money to have the right to vote. And the House of Commons has no power at this time. So for your average layperson, your businessman, your farmer, whatnot, you have no control over government at home. But if you move to Virginia, you do. So this is a huge kind of draw for people who want to have more control over their own running of civilization where they live, right? And again, all of these are trying to pull in people to come to the Virginia colony and under the Virginia Company. Virginia survives, the company does not. So in 1622, right, we have that huge Native American rebellion, burns the place to the ground, and in 1624, James takes over. He makes it into a royal colony for a couple of reasons. The first one is they need to protect the Englishmen that are there, right? A lot of the people there are writing home or are sending news back to the crown saying, look, we are on our own. The Native Americans came and burned the place down. We have no protection. The Virginia Company is worthless. They aren't protecting us. So when the crown has to send in protection, has to send in redcoats, etc., the crown takes it over. Basically creates a royal colony. Virginia Company's dead anyway, right? It does not survive. It's going bankrupt. And so you start to see a couple of things. You start to see, more protection, but also with that comes more control, right? The crown controls things now. Also, this is when the colony begins to become more profitable in the 1620s. So now James is going to swoop in and take over when the colony's actually making it, right? So he doesn't have to spend the money setting the colony up, but he takes it over kind of as a royal possession now. So maybe not so fair to the Virginia Company. It does become a royal colony. And shortly after that, in 1634, you see Maryland. Maryland is founded as the first colony with religious freedom. And we'll get into that probably closer to Wednesday or Friday about the founding of the original 13 and why they were founded. But that's Maryland is considered a Chesapeake area or the Chesapeake colonies. Right? So Jamestown in Virginia, Maryland, that area is considered the Chesapeake colonies, and they are mostly business ventures, right? As we said, mostly. But, and again, we'll come back to this, don't worry about it. You also have the Puritans. And again, these are Protestants. They are Protestants after the Protestant Reformation. John Calvin was a Puritan. You also have other Puritans that are in England, but in layman's term, Puritans are Protestants on steroids, really. They are very strict and very literal on the Bible, right? They all read the Bible. They're all very well, I wouldn't say very well educated. They can read, okay? So they're definitely more educated than those in Virginia, okay? And Puritans and Pilgrims are different. Pilgrims are Protestants. They do come to the New World, but they are considered separatists. In other words, they are separating from the Church of England. They view that it is too corrupt, and the Puritans are remaining in the Church of England because they want to purify the church from within. Puritans are not that fun. They are not fun to be around at all. And one of the big misnomers, right, is that when we learn this going through grade school, they came for religious freedom. They were being persecuted. Well, to a certain extent, yeah, but they were also persecuting everyone else, okay? So in England, the English aren't very sympathetic to them. They end up going to Holland and France for a while, but they irritate their neighbors there. So they decide to form the Massachusetts Bay Company and come to North America, to create their city on a hill, if you will, and show everybody how perfect you can be if you're a Puritan and be this light of the world. Okay. Um, so again, like I said, were they persecuted? Yes, you could make an argument for that. Were they annoying everyone else because they were trying to persecute everyone else? Also, yes. Okay. So they come in September. They leave in September of like 1622, which is a terrible time because it's about to be winter and you're going to be trying to set up a new place. They're heading for Virginia. They do not make it to Virginia. They get lost and end up landing in like Cape Cod area, Massachusetts, and they set up there, right? They found the colony in 1630, but that's after many, many people have immigrated already. So they have a rough winter. But once they realize that they have gotten to a new place, they are not in Virginia, they are not where they are supposed to be, they decide to create a document about how they're going to kind of run things until they either link up with Virginia or creating a whole new colony. And they realize pretty quickly that they're going to have to create a whole new area. And so this document is called the Mayflower Compact. Okay? And Mayflower is the name of the ship that they sailed on, and they create this and all sign it. So some people point back to the first self-government. Probably wasn't the first in the colonies, but it is a huge push for New England, right? They know at the get-go that they're going to have to set this up. And so they begin colonizing there. But there are a lot of differences, we'll go back to this, between Massachusetts and Virginia. The reason they came to Massachusetts was for religion. They came to find a new colony, set up a new city, and it will be the city on the hill. They come as family units. They come as whole congregations. They are more successful than the Virginians at the get-go. And people come in droves to Massachusetts because they're Puritans and pilgrims leaving Europe, and they're coming for land, and they're coming for a say over how the government runs, and their colony and religious freedom, in their mind, religious freedom, to practice their faith and set up kind of some local self-government that supports Puritanism. So we're going to go ahead and stop there today, but there are two different reasons for coming to the New World. They're both mainly English, although you're going to see some diversity in Virginia, and but not in Massachusetts. And we'll get more to what happens there on Wednesday. We'll also get into the Caribbean, what happens in the Caribbean, and the slave trade. We've forgotten about them, and kind of how things progress, right? Because in 1619, you have the first documented sale of an enslaved person in Virginia. Okay, any questions? I'm going to stop recording.